at the Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation at Boston University, and I'll be the moderator for today's Making Sense of Employment Research webinar. The webinar is funded by the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research. The webinar content does not represent the views or policies of the funding agency, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. The territory on which Boston University stands is that of the Wampanoag and Massachusetts people, and we honor and respect the history and current efforts of Native Indigenous communities. This webinar is being recorded, so you can access it later. Also, closed captioning has been turned on, and you can access this by clicking the button at the bottom of your screen. In case this is your first webinar with us, I'm going to introduce our speaker. They will share their research with you, and then we'll have a question and answer session at the end. If you have a question during the presentation, please post your question in the Q&A box or in the chat, and I'll pose them in the order we receive them at the end. If you have a technical question, please send a chat directly to me using the chat feature. Also, would very much like your feedback about this webinar, so at the end of the webinar, we'll be posting a survey, a very brief one. So today I would like to welcome Dr. Shannon Blajeski, who will be presenting her research paper, Critical Elements of Using Virtual Reality Job Interviewing in IPS-Supported Employment. This presentation describes the results of interviews with Individual Placement and Support, or IPS staff, across several Illinois communities who had used virtual reality job interview training in their work and clients receiving IPS. Dr. Blajeski is a mental health intervention researcher who is interested in improving career and income pathways for young adults with early psychosis to prevent the often intractable poverty associated with long-term dependence on disability benefits. Her research is situated at the crux of her lengthy clinical social work experiences in behavioral health settings and her scholarly training in social welfare, and she brings an additional 10 years of experience with the implantation of the assertive community treatment model to her work. Dr. Blajeski is currently an assistant professor in the School of Social Work at Portland State University and a collaborator with our center at the Boston University, the Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation. Additionally, she has active research partnerships with Michigan Navigate and the Oregon Early Assessment and Support Alliance Center for Excellence. Dr. Blajeski, welcome. We are excited to hear from you.
Thank you, Jane. Here we go. Hi, everybody. Good morning if you are on the West Coast, and good lunchtime for those of you on the East Coast and others from other places. I am Dr. Shannon Blajeski, and I am currently in the state of Oregon at Portland State University in the School of Social Work. Our School of Social Work handles the MSW and undergrad training for social workers in pretty much the entire state of Oregon. So we have a very, very large social work training program. And we also have mental health researchers and services research for youth in transition and adults going. So it's a great place to be having some excitement around this type of work. So I'll talk a little bit about myself and beyond what Jane said. So thank you, Jane. I love that overview because I don't have to repeat some of it. So I primarily, my work is primarily currently with young adults who receive services from early psychosis programs. And I'm doing some intervention work right now on earlier adaptation to the C, or Supported Employment Education model, which is typically the IPS version for young adults. There's also IPSY and a lot of other versions of that model to kind of look at adding on to the existing intervention or enhancing it. And what I'm going to talk to you about today with this paper was an enhancement or an adjunctive add-on to the IPS model. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that going in. And I guess without further ado, let's get going. So this paper was titled Critical Elements of Using Virtual Reality Job Interviewing, which I will also refer to as VR-JIT. So if you see that acronym referred to in these slides, that's the Virtual Reality Job Interviewing Training Program in IPS supported employment. And this was a project with many people. So first of all, I want to thank Dr. Matthew Smith, who is the Dean for Research at the University of Michigan School of Social Work. This was his project for a very long time, and it has VR-JIT has been used not only in community mental health settings, with adults with serious mental illness, but with youth with autism and returning citizens in the Michigan prison system. I worked with Dr. Smith as a postdoctoral research fellow at the University of Michigan, where I went after my PhD, as well as Megan and Jeff, who were our research assistants at the time, and then Eugene Olvey with the state of Illinois, Kim User and Susan McGurk, who many of you are familiar with BU, Center for Psych Rehab. And finally, Lisa Rosano, who was at the time at Thresholds and is a professor at University of Illinois, Chicago, though I believe there's other things going on in her career right now. So sorry about this line here. This is the only slide that would not agree to hide its background graphics. I tried everything to remove that distracting line. But here we go. Okay, so as I mentioned, this work was primarily based at the University of Michigan School of Social Work, which is where VR-JIT is still based currently, for any of you who are interested after this presentation. And it was a collaboration between multiple partners. So there's a couple of pictures here. This is a picture of an area in north central Chicago where Thresholds Mental Health Agency is based. Thresholds is the largest mental health agency in the urban Chicago area. They serve an extremely diverse amount of clients. And this is where the randomized controlled trial of VR-JIT within IPS took place. And I'll be talking about that in a second. And then I also have this gorgeous Italian-like photo of Springfield, Illinois, because the other area where our data came from for this paper was kind of scattered community mental health center sites where people were doing IPS and using VR-JIT, which I'll talk about in a second. I just thought that was kind of interesting. I've never seen a picture of Springfield, Illinois that's looking like Italy, but there we go. Shout out to the folks in Springfield. So just really briefly, my agenda today in this Making Sense of Employment research webinar is to talk a little bit about the background of this paper, why we decided to look at the data in this way, what our methods were, what the results were, and what are the implications of these results for employment services. I say employment services vaguely because it could be implications for IPS or also implications just for thinking about vocational work with individuals with serious mental health issues. So just really briefly, and some of you may be very familiar with this background, and for some of you, this may not be your main area. So please hang with me if this seems repetitive. So one of the things that we know is that there seems to be this persistently high unemployment rate among adults with serious mental illnesses. So that's, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, psychosis, and, sometimes bipolar 1, depending on the situation. There's some kind of divergent research in that area right now. Those diagnoses used to be kind of all grouped together underneath the SMI umbrella. So sometimes we use that acronym to refer to those diagnoses, but not always. And the research is always being updated in that area. The individual placement and support, or IPS model, is the primary evidence-based treatment to increase rates of competitive, i.e. not sheltered employment. So sheltered employment, it used to be individuals who were under the SMI umbrella for diagnoses, were sort of just had kind of ongoing vocational training, but they didn't necessarily go out and get jobs. They didn't interview, they didn't go out and get jobs in quote unquote the real world. They often worked in things called sheltered workshops, which are still common in the developmental disability, intellectual disability community, where people are doing sort of piecemeal work for under minimum wage. And so the IPS model came out and said, we don't really have any strong data that sort of vocational rehabilitation has outcomes in the real world in terms of people being employed. So let's change what we're doing and focus really on placing people in real jobs. However, even though IPS has been successful in placing people in real jobs, they have kind of a mixed rate of people who get jobs after they participate in supported employment or IPS supported employment. So about 45% of people who participate in IPS are not obtaining employment. And some more recent studies have emerged demonstrating that clients who stay in IPS longer without really getting into employment right away or having that successful job placement may benefit from add-on services, or what we call adjunct services. And that was actually Susan McGurk's study referenced in that last piece. So we have this kind of high chronic poverty rate, and we want to have people potentially be earning money or at least doing something that is meaningful to them and earning some money. And yet we have individuals maybe who've been unemployed longer who aren't necessarily finding that job through IPS by itself. So I told you already a little bit about the IPS history, but what they do, for those who aren't familiar, is they focus on these kind of 5 areas. So rapid job placement. So an individual indicates what their work history is, what kind of job they want, and the supported employment specialist kind of goes out and tries to create a job for them, or at least does a lot of hands-on work to try to place them in a job. They provide ongoing support, such as job coaching on the job, and it's based that this is driven by what the client is interested in. And they also provide benefit counseling, meaning that like there's this, as you all know, when you have Social Security disability, there's an algorithm for how much you can earn before your disability benefits are adjusted. And so sometimes that's a barrier to people going back to work. And benefits counseling is a spot where IPS can really help like demystify that for people. And so that's no longer a barrier, and they can kind of understand, okay, if I work this many hours, I'll still have this much of a benefit coming in. And I already mentioned about the research. So we had limited research on traditional voc rehab programs showing efficacy in competitive employment. And so because of that, IPS as it is now doesn't allow for a lot of like what we call job readiness training or things like that. Oops, I went too far. Sorry about that. So then just to kind of flip over to what VR-JIT is, as I mentioned, it's virtual reality job interview training. It's an internet-based job interview simulator that facilitates repeated practice of job interviews with a virtual hiring manager named Molly Porter. So there are additional names and people who are sort of aimed at different target populations, but Molly Porter was the hiring manager that was used in both of these studies. We oftentimes at Michigan had referred to this project just as Molly because everybody kind of got used to that. So what happens is that trainees who use this simulated virtual reality software, not software, internet-based program, they practice job interviews, they practice their own responses with Molly, and then they receive 4 levels of automated feedback. So let's go back forward to the picture. So this is a picture of what Molly looks like. This isn't what she always looks like with the large retail establishment behind her there. But I'm actually going to click over to some other pictures really quickly to show you all what VR-JIT looks like. And it's going to make me have to change over what I'm sharing. So hold on one second. Okay, here we go. So now you should all see, this is again, as I mentioned, University of Michigan School of Social Work, the Level Up Lab. There'll be links, by the way, later in the presentation to access this information. So here's some of the pictures where you learn about what an interview is, what you do. There's some general tips here on the right-hand side in green. Being upbeat and positive, asking questions, how you talk about a disability, handling illegal questions. So people basically do kind of like a job application where they indicate what they mainly want to do. And then what happens is they move into a job interview, simulated job interview that's kind of based at that level that they indicated. And they do get an overview, as I said, of these tips beforehand. And then basically the Molly program has a bank of 1,000 type of interview questions. And so people can type in their responses and they get real-time feedback. You know, that was great, or that wasn't so great from working with Molly. And so this here is kind of what the interface looks like. This person here in the pink shirt pops up and gives them real-time feedback. So that is just briefly what it looks like. And again, I have this link for you all for later. See if we're seamless. Do we all see the slideshow again?
We could see it.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so now I'm talking a little bit more about the study. So our aim with this study was to explore the processes and perceived benefits of using VR-JIT by IPS employment specialists who implemented the tool, as well as from their clients when that data was available. And what we did is we had data from two separate studies. So first of all, I'm going to talk about both these studies briefly. First of all, there was a randomized controlled trial of IPS plus VR-JIT versus IPS as usual. So in that case, we had a division between IPS, a test group where they added VR-JIT into their support and employment services with their clients. And then we compared that group against people that were just receiving IPS services as usual. And as I mentioned, that was at Thresholds Community Mental Health Center in Chicago. And here is Dr. Smith's R01 number. And we also had done a qualitative study with IPS employment specialists across Illinois who received that VR-JIT training on their own. And they just kind of introduced it to their IPS participants and had them use VR-JIT to do job interviewing practice. So a little bit more about the data sources. So here's the divide. So we had 54 people in the test group who got IPS and VR-JIT at Threshold in Chicago, and 36 who were just an IPS as usual, a total out of 90. I bolded some of the inclusion criteria just so you all could understand, who we were serving. So they had to be actively engaged with IPS when they enrolled in the study, meaning they had seen their employment specialist at least once in the last month. Their diagnoses had to be schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, major depressive disorder of any type, or bipolar disorder of any type. And then other things were English fluency, at least a fourth grade reading level. So that was related to making sure that they had the reading level to be able to understand Molly. And really importantly, they had to be currently unemployed or underemployed and planning to interview for a job within the next 4 weeks. And that's important because, we intentionally didn't have, or they intentionally didn't look at people who maybe hadn't decided yet if they were really serious about trying to get a job before they enrolled. So there was some level of interest before people started working with Molly. And the exclusion criteria were cognitive issues, from any vision and hearing problems, and this is all related to where the tool was in development at the time, and other kind of things about contact information and suicidality. So very typical RCT exclusion criteria. So how it went was focus groups. So people, obviously, they used VR-JIT while they were at Thresholds, and we collected quantitative data. They took their surveys. There's an additional paper about that, about the outcomes. But what this paper is interested in is actually what people thought about it and how it went. So there were focus groups and interviews to learn more about the implementation of Molly, how feasible it was, how acceptable it was, and how usable it was for clients. And that was, again, at Thresholds in the RCT. The focus groups included employment specialists who had been trained to implement it. So that ended up being 11 that participated across 3 focus groups of staff or ESs, employment specialists. And then participants had to have had completed at least 1 session. And that ended up being 13 of clients or participants across 3 focus groups. We also did additional semi-structured interviews with employment specialists and participants when we had started to learn a little bit more about implementation of the project, and we wanted to know a little bit more about that. So we really were able to access a lot of focus group and interview data, all about using VR-JIT within the context of IPS, both from ESs as well as, by that I mean employment specialists, as well as, these individuals who were receiving mental health services at Thresholds and used it. So then we had, as I mentioned, the community-based IPS sites throughout Illinois. And what we did there was we conducted semi-structured interviews over Zoom with 8 IPS employment specialists. And we unfortunately were not able to interview clients. We didn't do a full-scale IRB for that study. We just were really at the time wanting to know how did it go for the IPS the workers who were using this kind of on their own, and what did they learn? For those of you who are very visual learners, as I am as well, this is a figure kind of showing the lay of the land differently. So above here, we have the RCT participants and the various focus groups. And then at the second level here, we had the interviews. And then on the bottom half, we had the community IPS participants that we interviewed. So that is all of the sources of our data. And here is an interesting slide about the demographics. So you could see here that we were comparing staff in one column and clients in the other. You could see that staff overall were a little bit younger than our participants. So clients had a mean age of 49.6 and while staff were 34.3. So it's interesting, you have like younger employment specialists helping out individuals who are more senior than they are. There's also a race breakdown. There was slightly higher amount of white staff as compared to the clients. And then the other thing that I bolded here on the right-hand side is that 77% of the IPS clients who participated in the focus group, so the ones who were part of the RCT at thresholds, were unemployed for more than 2 years at the time of the study. So yes, they were working with IPS, they were somewhat engaged, that they had seen them at least once in the last 30 days, and they had said that they planned to interview for a job soon. But more than 2 years of unemployment is quite a long time, and allows an individual to get quite rusty if you think about job applications and job interviews at that time. So I'm going to talk a little bit now about data analysis, basically how we analyzed all of these types of data. So again, we had focus groups and we had semi-structured interviews. We used the Deduce software, which is a qualitative coding software, and a team of 3 of us coded the data, and this is how we did it. So we used a modified grounded theory approach, and that's because we were really interested in what is this process? Is there a process that happens when people are using VR-JIT? And what does that look like for employment specialists? How does it impact their work? And how does it impact participants when they're using it? So we kind of were looking at the data in 2 levels in our qualitative analysis. So first we used a constant comparative approach and then later theoretical coding. So the first technique was that we used open coding, which is where you kind of just read the transcripts for understanding and then really code everything that's interesting or that stands out to you. Three different people do that, and then you meet together to compare. What did you find? What did the codes indicate? And is there any discrepancy between one person thinks something is this and one person thinks maybe it's this instead? An example of that would be confidence versus motivation. That's another hot topic in my own work right now. So that's how we come up with an agreement on themes. And then after we resolve our discrepancies, the lead analyst, which at the time was myself, diagrammed a model of these processes to figure out, what is actually happening here for both IPS clients and employment specialists. And then after and I'll be showing you that in a little bit after we go through some of the themes. And then finally at the end, before we kind of settled on our final list of themes and our final diagram, which became our theoretical model, we kind of thought, well, where have we seen this before? Where is previous theoretical research around these mechanisms that are kind of underlying what's happening when people are using VR-JIT? What are the change agents and what do we already know about those if they are the same ones that we think we're seeing? So next I'm going to walk you through the themes and just give a few quotes to kind of illustrate what we saw. So the first theme, and by the way, we only have 3 themes, and we feel like they were kind of operating separately, but also in an overlapping way. So the first theme was that VR-JIT, see, it's a mouthful when you even get to the end of the middle of a talk, that something about exposure in a safe environment was really important to both clients who use this, as well as like the IPS employment specialists who could kind of see what was happening. So again, this is a simulated job interview, but it's not a mock interview. It's not like with your case manager who might have their own preconceived relationship stuff with you as a client provider relationship. But this is, a real time human that's virtual who's giving you feedback immediately. But it's also not a real job interview where you have anxiety and you're, just worried about everything and saying the wrong thing. And again, feeling kind of out of practice or very rusty. So I will stop talking and reading these to you. So if the red is highlighting kind of these words that seem to be, or phrases that seem to be important for employment specialists. So the first person said, what I like the most is something I talked about earlier. It just provides a very safe situation for someone to answer these more fundamental high frequency questions, again, interview questions, so they can have some comfort in what they're doing. So there we see these words safe and comfort. And then another employment specialist said, also they use the word comfort. It's good to have a comforting space to get your first exposure to what an interview might be like, and practicing some of the more difficult questions, having a shot at it with nothing on the line. I thought that was pretty great. So safety, is there a hand raised? Do we want to take a question, Jane?
Yeah, I see a hand raised. Do you have a question? Or could we save it till the end if you want to
Yeah,
put it in the chat?
let's try to save it till the end if we can.
Yeah.
I just didn't, the hand
Yeah,
raise was different
that
in
would
the
be
chat. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so that again, this was exposure in kind of that safe environment. The second theme that we saw was practicing, so kind of a little bit implied that you're practicing when you're doing job interview training virtually, but practicing and receiving that job interviewing feedback kind of over and over again was this kind of repetition was helpful for people. So here's a client, because I just gave only ESs. So in the blue, something that we thought was great that the client said. So she's talking about a lot of the questions about that Molly asked being helpful, how to work with, sorry, I'm moving my Zoom around, with a team. If you see somebody doing something wrong, do you report it to your boss, or how you felt as far as your confidence in getting the job? And they said, I never really have been on an actual interview like that, because when I went to work at their last job, I got the job and I was doing the Molly interview at the same time, and it made me more confident. And so they kind of alluded to the next, like they didn't end up keeping that job, but that the confidence really improved after asking a lot of the questions, just getting used to it. So we kind of see that maybe fear and anxiety going down along with the practicing and repetition going up. And then here we have an employment specialist perspective on the job practicing. So they were talking about reflecting on their work and how it improved with clients after the clients were using VR-JIT. So it did help with me being able to kind of reiterate things that I was already telling my clients that are good in interviews or appropriate in interviews, things you want to share in interviews, that helps them to reiterate the good things and also frown on the bad things. So here we're seeing like the ES saying, hey, this was like a value added aspect to my work. And something that I could then pick up and use in my conversation with people. And then the third theme was seeing improved confidence and motivation in job seeking. And this is huge because we know that this is something that's kind of been underlying these long time unemployment situations for people. So this first client said a big part of what it was for me was it pushed me to understand, I really have to work harder and I really can get a job. It's really possible. So not just seeing a job as like a far off thing, but this thing that's closer than you think. And then the practicing and the exposure we think really led to this. And everybody kind of likes this next quote from our client. So it's like, wake up, turn the light bulb on, get on your P's and Q's, because this lady, Molly, is trying to help. You're trying to get a job, and this lady, she's not playing with you. She's asking you questions that are essential to going back to work. I haven't worked in 21 years. And so this was just a really big step for me, and it helped me get my confidence back again and stuff. So just a lovely quote from from somebody who struggled with very, very long-term unemployment. And then our last example of a quote is from an ES, again, talking about, in this case, making the meetings more productive. Members is what the thresholds used to describe their clients at the time. They were able to feel more comfortable with communicating with me around job goals. So that's a huge thing. And helping them to be even more motivated to want to find work. And then it's like they became excited because they wanted to utilize the tools that they gained from Molly. Like, I've been practicing, so I'm ready. I'm like, okay, well, let's go out and job search. Let's go get this job. Lots of cool stuff. I lied, there's one left. I'll let you all read this one. I highlighted Molly really helped them to, again, break out of their shell. And I saw a difference in their level of confidence is the big takeaway here. So, here across all of these interviews and focus groups, we heard all positive things when it came to like seeing clients show up back with their one-to-one IPS appointments, with more confidence, or being more ready to talk about work, and maybe even showing some excitement about forward motion around employment. So this is our theoretical model, as I mentioned earlier. And what we're seeing here is really that this improved confidence and motivation and job seeking was the kind of the end game here. So they had the exposure, it was a safe environment, so they could keep doing it. And the keep doing it part is the practicing and receiving job interviewing feedback. So that whole, like, we call it, I'm going to refer to it as behavioral rehearsal. The next slide is about implications. We didn't call it behavioral rehearsal here, but behavioral rehearsal is essentially like this whole, the more times you do something, the more your confidence starts to go up as you feel like you understand it and grasp it more. And so that's sort of what we are seeing here. And again, individuals did receive jobs. Not everybody who went through the study did, but individuals did. And so this was, we think, some of the underlying things that were going on, which is what qualitative research can sometimes do to help us understand. So moving into implications. So I think that the biggest takeaway here, kind of thinking like high level and not so much about the specific themes, is that individuals who have been disconnected from the labor market or employment have a wide gap to cross. I mean, 77% of the Chicago space sample unemployed for more than 2 years. That data, by the way, had a lot of like very, very, very like long-term either unemployment or extreme levels of underemployment among their all of the people who were in both arms of the study. And it's important, I think, for service providers to understand that what those barriers really are to employment, and also understand like how someone's confidence is almost non-existent about getting a job when it's been that long where you haven't interacted with the labor market or with an employer in the real world. I think that that's not like a hit or anything on mental health providers, because that's not where the training originally was. We're sort of trained to find out what someone's work history is and what they're interested in, and just kind of like do some job applications and help them do job placement. But what we find is that isn't quite the best fit for people who have a kind of a wider gap to cross to get there. And so potentially VR-JIT could be one tool to add to IPS work to help people get there with job interviewing training. Secondly, this exposure to job interview practice could be a low risk way to improve job interview skills for these particular adults with longer unemployment. So they're not, it's not like a job that they failed at, as I mentioned earlier. They're also not kind of having to do that job interview process in a mock interview format with their case manager. Some case managers and supported employment specialists are awesome at mock interviewing, and some of you don't like it at all. And that's kind of what we know based on the research, that and it's also a lengthy thing to have to do. So this is kind of why VR-JIT is adjunctive for people. As I mentioned, the behavioral rehearsal improved job-related social skills and job interview self-confidence. And then lastly, VR-JIT is separate from everyday IPS tasks. So this was not part of our paper in the results, but so that in that way, it provides value-added job interview training for clients that's not completed by the ES. So, you have your tasks, you have your job development, you have all your fidelity items that you need to meet when you're an IPS worker. And in this case, for people who really need that connection, they can go and practice their job interviewing on the side and then come back and see you and talk to you about it. And as these ESs told us, where there's a lot of things that people learned about that. I will say that in my current work with young adults with early psychosis, I'm focused on a population of young adults who we sort of refer to as not in education, employment, or training. So people who either started having illness when they're in high school and dropped out of high school, or they just never worked ever in their life and they're young. And we're finding really similar things, which is that in our research, which is that they don't have the confidence. And for young people, they don't even know like what to do for a job or what that would look like. We had people say, when the employment specialist came to me and said a job, I thought they meant a job meant 40 hours a week. And I was just in survival mode and I didn't know what to do. And so we kept hearing over and over again, I wasn't confident. I didn't have confidence. And when we interviewed C staff, we actually found that very few of them understood that it wasn't confidence. They thought they weren't interested, they weren't motivated. It was anxiety, and that it was just really, really difficult. So I think like one of the takeaways from this qualitative paper is not only that this extra virtual job interviewing helps IPS workers with their job and it helps people become more comfortable, but that people have gaps that we don't understand very well unless we talk to them about it. So that I think is a part to end on that part. And we did have some limitations to this study. So some of you might have noticed that we didn't interview clients. So that was obviously one of our limitations. We didn't interview clients in the community study. So we didn't have that balance to hear from those clients. Because we analyzed the secondary data that was previously collected as part of different studies, we were unable to sample until we found a negative case. So, if we had just been doing this study intentionally to learn about this, we might keep interviewing or recruiting for ESs who use VR-JIT until we heard somebody that said, it didn't really work for me, or this client had this terrible experience and quit the program or something. We did have clients in the RCT that struggled with VR-JIT just with like transportation because they weren't at the time delivering it at their home. This was actually just pre-COVID and it ended kind of right at the beginning and middle of the first year of COVID. So I believe now there is like what we call mobile Molly, where Molly can actually go out with people in the field. You'll have to verify that though with the Level Up Lab folks currently. But so that's one limitation of using secondary data, is we can only talk about what we saw. Again, we weren't able to interview community study clients, and also due to a small sample size and a qualitative method, the study is not generalizable to everybody. This is some of the references of just things I talked about here, and we can make these slides available, by the way. I do have further resources about VR-JIT for you all on the last slide, but first I thought it was a good time to maybe stop for questions. Jane, are you monitoring the chat or would you like me to go through?
I'm sorry, I didn't unmute myself. Yes, there's a couple of questions, but I wanted to first thank you for the presentation. And I was wondering if you could say again how much like staff time is required, or I know it's the the Molly and the virtual reality training is done separately, but how much support does somebody need in order to use it or to debrief after it and so on?
Sorry about that. I was just scrolling for a second. Support wise, you mean for employment specialists to
Right.
start using it?
Mhm.
So I believe the Illinois individuals who did it they went to a training, and then they were able to use it. They got like a pass key from the training and were just able to have clients start using it. So very low. The one thing that did come up in our randomized control trial was, or I'm sorry, our implementation. We had an implementation paper where we learned more about actually implementing it and delivering it. The one thing that was a time issue at that time was like sometimes the laptops would glitch with the program. And if you were on limited Wi-Fi or something like that, and again, this is pre-COVID, so some of this may have been ironed out
Right.
in a post-COVID world, as all of our technology has evolved with COVID. But I believe that was the number one issue that people had when it came to like something taking too long or it not working. But
Right.
otherwise, it's not something you have to sit next to the person and do. It's something that once you kind of get them logged in and they can start figuring out how to go through the interface, it's very simple and it's not something that you need to be there for. So they can do it completely independently of you.
Interesting. So here's a question. I think this one's outside the scope of the talk. I was wondering, what about having a US passport to be able to handle employment sponsorship questions on online applications? I think that, and also, I guess insurance sales commission and solar sales commission jobs are gonna be really important. So I think, employment specialists are, a lot of their job is job development, and so they do pay attention to, how the market is job market is going in terms of careers and work and so on. But I don't think that the virtual reality training really relates to those areas specifically, does it?
No, it doesn't.
Yeah.
Specific to that, yeah.
So here's a question. Did the IPS provide the technology for clients to meet with Molly?
It wasn't provided by IPS. It's like a standalone simulation program that's internet based. So you just open up a web page and the client logs in and they can just start it. So it's not something that IPS provides by itself. Does that answer the question?
That was Tina. There were a couple questions sort of related, like is Molly widely available and are there new AI technologies that would expand this training?
So this is a paper that I was working on 3-4 years ago, and I have not kept up with all of the things that have happened since then with VR-JIT. So I can talk about, the qualitative aspect and what we found, but I would I'm going to actually put the level up thing in the chat, and it is also, this is the page that I showed you earlier, that you can click around and look at pictures of Molly and learn more about it. That is one of the best ways to get a sense of how to use it.
Mm-hmm. And I think follow up to the question, one of the earlier questions is where a person doesn't have a laptop, the question about access. So I think the access to Molly was through the IPS program. Just through the sense of the technology of the
Yes, the IPS workers had it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right. So I don't think at the moment, you have to have a login, so you have to have some kind of authorization to use it at the moment.
Yes.
That may be something that changes in the future, but I was wondering too about whether, and I don't know if this would have come up in the analysis, whether there's an age component, like older staff, older clients? I know that on the whole, the staff are younger, who are probably more used to using online technology, but I can imagine that for some people, just hearing virtual reality might be a little intimidating if you don't know what to expect.
Yes. Yeah. Could you repeat that part again, Jane? It's just a comment about the virtual reality.
No, this is like my question, just whether there was
Oh,
like
yeah.
older people, speaking for myself.
Yeah.
I,
Right.
I,
It sounds a little like goggles and, hand stuff with big gloves. Right. Yeah. Yeah. That is the name. I mean, it was a simulation software. In fact, I'm actually going to move to the next slide because we have more resources here. So if anyone's interested in like how it was developed, this first link is the original paper of how this simulation software company started it with Dr. Smith and his work. And so all of the details behind it are there. Currently, it's still being used, like I said, as virtual reality job interview training. But this kind of simulation use is becoming more and more widespread. I'm sure some of you who are on this call have some experience doing like simulated therapy and simulated like training practice in your work. It's becoming more and more common in like graduate schools for training. Just because, you used to have to kind of have like the fake client kind of thing in the recorded room. And I think again, COVID kind of sped us up. So well, this was virtual reality and simulation. And now I think during COVID, it's kind of become more simulation focused.
Mhm.
And yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I'm sure more AI technologies will be coming. I think at the moment it's more often used
Right.
to enhance search engines. Like I think the National Ticket to Work, there's a website, and it uses some kind of AI to, as sort of a virtual, assistant, someone to answer questions online. So it's being used in that way, but I'm sure it's going to be expanding too. People say, looking forward to using this with IPS. Mock interviews are helping, but practitioner and participant relationships, age and employment gaps, and timing constraints. Yeah, I think you kind of touched on all of those issues.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. So Ian, you're doing mock interviews right now and you see that they help. I don't know if Ian can talk, or you could at least, he said, thanks. Thanks, Ian. That's great. That's why I'm glad I mentioned that because I started my career after my undergrad degree in psychology doing employment case management for a welfare office in the state of Wisconsin. And I had job interest groups with people and I did mock interviewing. And then it's interesting that my career, through all of the years of working with, the ACT model and a little bit with the IPS model within ACT teams and then early psychosis and focus on career development, that I came back in some ways to that early concept of mock interviewing. And I mean, there was a reason that we did it. And it is to really kind of help people bridge that big gap. And that simulation is a way that they can do that without you taking up all of your time. Because
Right.
all IPS workers know how time is valuable.
Yeah, and I think the Dr. Smith's outcomes papers have shown that it is effective in terms of employment outcomes. And it's really interesting from this analysis that you presented that it's the steps of getting the familiarity, the safety, the experience, and then having that confidence going into interviews is what makes a big difference.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think.
Great. Well, we are perfectly on time.
Yeah, I think, are we, any other questions right now? Age gaps and egos could be disregarded with a non-person interview coach. Yeah, I think that was something that you found, that having somebody, an artificial, somebody like Molly who is doesn't come with preconceived knowledge of the person and ideas. It's more, there's a lot to be said for that.
Yeah, definitely. And like I said, I believe Rita and Travis were the two that were used in the ASD schools in Michigan, and they were found to be a better fit than Molly for the young adult or youth population.
Yeah.
I actually have to say a funny comment about that around the age thing. So in the Chicago randomized controlled trial study, we had some either clients or ESs refer to her as Mean Molly. Not that it wasn't always Mean Molly, but like there were some responses, and that the even the clients were like, yeah, Mean Molly like really showed me things, even though I didn't like the meanness, but because that's what, and there again, you can't be mean as their employment specialist.
Right.
You can be directive a little bit and supportive, but sometimes it's just that real-time feedback that's separate that I think is another really a great part about the simulated job interviews.
Yeah. Last question, has there been thought to tailor the questions for specific employers and allow the clients to tape their responses and submit the answers they believe did the best? That's a really interesting question, but I think that's more to the people who are developing or working on the program.
I don't know. I do think that you can save your responses within the system to go back, but I'm not sure I can't honestly remember if you can video it and like record a video of it at the same time and play it back for yourself.
Yeah.
But I know that the developers they have added features and they've added additional features over time, kind of like Zoom. So check with the resources that I gave you there.
Yes. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much.
Hold on.
We'll wrap up
Go back
here
to my
today.
PowerPoint.
So I think there's no more questions. So I want to thank everyone for taking time out of your day to participate. I especially want to thank Dr. Blajeski for your work and presenting today. There will be a video of this presentation posted online at the Center for Psychiatric Rehabilitation website in case you'd like to access it later. In the meantime, when you exit the webinar, you will see a brief survey. Please take just a moment to provide us with feedback before moving on with your day. Finally, we're in the process of scheduling other webinars, so pay attention to your email. Thank you all very much for being here today.
Nice seeing everyone. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming.